A siren blared, red lights flashed, and just as a young engineer reached for the wrong panel, "Do not touch that." The voice cut through chaos like a blade. It did not belong to a technician. It belonged to Rebecca Lane, a single mom in faded jeans holding her daughter's backpack. Seconds later, her sketchbook stopped, a $300 million disaster. This is the story of the woman no one saw coming. The alarm blared like 1,000 wasps in a tin can. Red strobes painted the sleek metal walls of the aerospace facility in violent pulses, matching the pounding in every worker's chest. Inside the central control bay of Solaritech's flagship factory in Texas, a dozen engineers huddled over monitors, their fingers flying across keyboards, trying to contain a cascading systems failure that no one had seen coming. A reactor panel on the north wall had begun to overheat. The coolant flow algorithm was stuck in a loop. One faulty override could trigger a domino of power surges, one that would detonate a fireball strong enough to collapse the entire east wing. "Reroute sub-channel input to auxiliary node," barked the lead engineer. "It is not responding, buffering at 87%, shouted someone else. Garrett Stone, the CEO of Solaritech himself, stood stone-faced behind the reinforced glass. Early 40s, crisp, charcoal suit, eyes like cold steel. He had flown in for a high-profile investor demonstration, a final systems check before the company launched its next-generation propulsion line. This was not part of the demo. Then a junior technician made a move, stepping toward the manual override panel on the far wall, ready to flip a fail-safe breaker. And from the hallway, past the authorized personnel line, a voice sliced through the chaos like a blade. "Do not touch that panel." The entire room froze. The engineer's hand hovered inches from the switch. Heads turned. In the doorway stood a woman in scuffed sneakers and jeans smeared with something blue. Her brown hair was tucked behind one ear, her left shoulder carrying a pink backpack with a bunny on the zipper. She looked out of place, like someone who had walked into a movie set by mistake. But her eyes were sharp, focused, afraid, but absolutely sure. "I said, do not touch it," she repeated louder this time. "The panel is rigged to route voltage back through the emergency loop. If you trigger it, the capacitor will spike to overload. You will blow the entire diagnostics wing." Silence. For 2 seconds, maybe 3. Then someone scoffed. "Who the hell are you?" The woman blinked, like the question had just occurred to her. Then she held up a notebook, the kind with graph paper and curled edges, and flipped it open to a hand-drawn diagram. Arrows, valves, pressure zones. "Call me whatever you want," she said, "but if you do not want this entire place to go up in flames, you might want to look at page 7. The engineer stepped back from the panel. Garrett narrowed his eyes, watching her. He recognized her vaguely, maybe from maintenance, janitorial, but then he saw the lines on the page she was holding. It was not a doodle. It was a heat pressure diagram, detailed, labeled, and terrifyingly accurate. A security guard moved to escort her out, but Garrett held up a hand. Waited. The sirens continued to wail, but now the tension in the room had shifted. And as the woman stepped forward, pulling a pencil from behind her ear, holding the sketchbook like it was a lifeline, the first wave of disaster was already averted. And no one had any idea who she really was. 12 hours before the factory sirens screamed and the world turned upside down, Rebecca Lane was pushing a mop across the wide concrete floors of the South Side wing. The aerospace complex was quiet at night. Eerily so. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across workbenches and prototype drones, while monitors blinked in silent status check cycles. Rebecca moved through it all like muscle memory. Mop, bucket, rag, repeat. 34 years old, with bright green eyes and a brain sharper than most in the building, she blended into the background in the eyes of the engineers who walked past her each morning, if they noticed her at all. They saw the faded jeans, the oversized hoodie with frayed sleeves, and the messy ponytail that barely contained her thick, dark curls. They did not see the mind behind the mop handle. They did not know she once aced thermodynamics before dropping out of her mechanical engineering program halfway through her final year. They did not know that the same hands wiping their breakroom tables had once drawn schematics professors used in lectures. They definitely did not know that when she scrubbed the corners of the turbine lab floor, she sometimes paused to sketch modified duct routes or torque distribution arcs in her pocket notebook, just for fun. But one person did know. Ellie, 8 years old, all elbows and oversized glasses, Ellie loved two things more than anything: asking uncomfortable questions and reading her mother's notebook. While other children watched cartoons, Ellie preferred blueprint puzzles. She traced airflow paths with her fingers and asked why pressure changed in tight bins. She used Legos to recreate her mother's diagrams, and once glued miniature sticky notes to a fan system in their apartment to optimize airflow. Rebecca called her "my little aerospace goblin." Ellie called her mom "the smartest human alive." They lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the east edge of town. The hallway smelled like bleach and burnt dryer sheets, and the rent went up every 6 months. Rebecca worked the night shift at the aerospace facility and picked up freelance cleaning gigs on weekends, anything to keep Ellie fed, safe, and curious. Her husband had left them when Ellie was just a baby. No note, no explanation, just a pile of debt and an eviction letter that arrived 2 days later. Rebecca had dropped everything: her thesis, her dreams, her carefully structured future, to survive. And she had, barely. Sometimes, in the quiet hours between 2 a.m. and sunrise, while folding rags in the janitor's closet or staring out across the glowing panels of the plant floor, Rebecca wondered what it would have been like to finish her degree, to sit in one of those ergonomic chairs and be paid to build, not just clean. But those thoughts never lasted long. Reality always pulled her back. Ellie's lunch to pack, utility bills to chase, busted appliances to fix with duct tape and cleverness. Still, her mind never turned off. She noticed patterns in the hum of the cooling vents, in the way the turbines seemed to whine just a little louder after system updates, in the way condensation built up too quickly on panel D3 when the air pressure dipped after midnight. She would jot these things down, not because anyone asked her to, but because she could not help it. Of course, the engineers never noticed, most barely said hello. Some actively rolled their eyes when she crossed their path. To them, she was invisible. To Ellie, she was everything. "Mom," Ellie said once, as she flipped through her mother's notebook, "why do you not tell the smart people your ideas?" Rebecca had smiled, because smart people do not always listen. Ellie had looked up, serious beyond her years. "Then, maybe they are not that smart." Rebecca chuckled, kissed the top of her head, and returned to scrubbing a smudge off the hallway wall. That night, Ellie had slipped her own drawing into the notebook, a stick figure version of Rebecca, holding a wrench, standing next to a rocket labeled "Mom's Ideas." Rebecca had not cried in front of anyone in years. But that night, under the flicker of a motion sensor bulb, she did. And just like that, the woman no one listened to kept drawing, just in case. It was supposed to be a quiet afternoon. Inside Stratus Aerotech's state-of-the-art facility in Houston, the mood was celebratory. Investors from Singapore, New York, and Dubai lined the observation deck, sipping espresso and marveling at the glass-enclosed production line below. At the center of it all stood Garrett Stone, Chief Executive Officer of Stratus, and a man used to making headlines for three things: brilliant strategy, brutal acquisitions, and tailored suits that cost more than most people's rent. But at that moment, Garrett's jaw was tight. The demo was going off script. A technician's whisper in his ear turned into a panicked murmur. The large central display, tracking coolant pressure, began flashing in yellow, then orange, then red. Meanwhile, in a back hallway near the employee entrance, Jenna Blake had just arrived early to pick up Harper. Her daughter had spent the day attending Engineer for a Day, an outreach event sponsored by Stratos to promote STEM learning for employee families. Jenna had filled in last minute as a custodial temp after someone on her shift called out. It paid better than the hardware store, and they needed the money. She wore navy overalls and rubber gloves, carrying Harper's pink backpack and a thermos of diluted juice. She was walking past a diagnostics terminal when something caught her eye, a pattern on the pressure gauge feed that did not match expected thermal ramp rates. Her eyes narrowed. That curve, it was not exponential. It was breaking into oscillations. Back inside the main control center, alarms began to wail. A junior engineer, barely out of college, fumbled with the manual override. Garrett turned sharply. "Do it now," he barked. The young man reached toward the control panel with a shaking hand. Just then, "Do not touch that panel." The shout cracked through the chaos. Everyone froze. All eyes turned toward the hallway. Jenna stood still, her glove half off, her voice still echoing in the tense, blinking red silence. The junior engineer blinked, confused. Garrett's face turned toward the voice like steel locking into place. "Excuse me?" one of the older staff members asked. "Who the hell are you?" Jenna did not back down. She stepped forward. "If you reroute coolant right now, the thermal spread will vapor lock across the secondary valves. You will not just lose the prototype. You will blow out half the west wing." Garrett stared at her. "You are the janitor?" "I am also a mechanical systems specialist with 12 years of field experience and a patent no one here seems to know exists," she said calmly. "But yeah, today I scrub floors." Silence. Harper peeked out from behind a nearby workstation. "That is my mommy," she whispered proudly to no one in particular. One of the engineers stepped forward. "Sir, the reroute protocol is standard. There is a 20% risk, max." Jenna looked directly at Garrett. "Do it and you lose the building, trust me, or do not. But look at this." She opened Harper's sketchbook and flipped to a page with colored crayon schematics. "She copied my emergency bypass design this morning. That is what saved us." On the page, a diagram drawn in pink and purple crayon, showing a diverter line feeding pressure away from the main circuit. Garrett looked at the sketch, then at Jenna, then at the flashing screen. "Do what she says," he said. The room held its breath. The junior engineer recalibrated based on Jenna's instruction. Pressure levels dipped, then stabilized. Sirens stopped. The room exhaled. Garrett Stone turned slowly toward the woman with the thermos in one hand and a child's backpack in the other. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Jenna raised an eyebrow. "I am the woman you almost ignored. Lucky for you, my daughter likes crayons." The silence following the emergency shutdown was brief. Too brief. "Who let her in here?" barked a white-coated supervisor striding toward Jenna. "This is a restricted operations floor." Another voice, clipped and sharp, chimed in. "She is janitorial staff. She has no clearance. Get her out." Two security personnel, stationed near the bay doors, stepped forward instinctively. Jenna did not move. She stood calmly beside the diagnostic station, Harper's sketchbook still open in her hand. "Sir," said a senior systems director to Garrett, "she breached protocol and delayed a safety override. That could have backfired." "Or," Jenna replied evenly, "it could have prevented a fatal systems cascade which you were seconds away from triggering. But I am just the janitor, right?" Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the condescension like a scalpel. Garrett stood still, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the sketchbook. The drawing, rough, childish, but mathematically sound, lined up perfectly with the custom emergency cooling design they had shelved months ago due to cost constraints. Another engineer stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "Sir, with respect, we cannot allow a civilian with no badge to remain in here. The board is watching. This is embarrassing." Embarrassing. That word hung in the air. Jenna lifted her chin. "You think embarrassment is worse than a 30-story explosion?" The room tensed. Garrett exhaled through his nose, deliberating. His team was watching. The investors behind the glass were murmuring. The incident would already be flagged on the internal security feed. He was supposed to be in control, flawless, commanding. But something about the woman in front of him, the way she never flinched, the blueprints still etched behind her eyes, rattled him. He opened his mouth. "Please escort the janitorial staff out," someone repeated at his side. Before he could respond, a small voice spoke up. Garrett looked down. She had stepped forward, arms crossed, eyes wide. She tugged on the edge of his sleeve, careful but firm. "If you do not listen to her," she said, "something really bad will happen, I promise." Dead silence. Garrett glanced around. All the years of protocol, power, and polished boardrooms had never prepared him for this moment. Being corrected by a 6-year-old, in pigtails, with one missing front tooth, and a voice that made something twist in his chest. He turned toward Jenna. "Tell me what you saw." The room erupted. "Sir, this is highly inappropriate. Garrett, you are setting a dangerous precedent." He could be making this up. But Garrett raised his hand, his voice cut clean through the noise. "Let her speak." Security backed away. Jenna blinked, surprised. But only for a second. She stepped to the screen, peeled off her cleaning gloves, and began drawing over the projected system map with the tip of a stylus. "This pressure line here," she said, tracing one finger along the red axis, "feeds back into the tertiary cooling notes. But because your override was still referencing the old circuit map, the input would have forced pressure against a closed relay." She looked up. Boom. A few engineers looked stunned. Garrett did not speak. He simply gestured for her to continue. Harper beamed. Outside, through the glass, the investors were still watching. Inside, the real story had just begun. Jenna placed the sketchbook carefully on the console. It looked out of place. Among the digital dashboards, AI-calibrated instruments, and high-precision glass, this little spiral notebook with a pink cover decorated in stickers looked like something a child had left behind. But what was inside, it would change everything. She flipped to the middle of the book, past doodles, reminder lists, and math games Harper had scribbled during their long evenings together at the plant's cafe corner. And there it was. A hand-drawn schematic of the airflow system. Jenna had sketched it weeks ago, just for fun, for curiosity, out of boredom. No one had asked her to. No one ever had. But she liked patterns. And over months of scrubbing baseboards and wiping smudge marks from glass doors, she had noticed something. Ductwork inconsistencies, noise anomalies, warm spots that should not exist. So she drew. Now, under the glare of emergency lights, she laid that notebook open in front of the most powerful man in the building. "This vent line here," Jenna said, tapping the diagram with one clean fingernail, "feeds too directly into the combustion output zone. And this curve? It is wrong. The bend creates back pressure that does not show up until the secondary intake hits maximum load." The lead operations engineer laughed, a short, incredulous scoff. "This is absurd. That system passed federal inspection. We paid consultants 6 figures. And yet you are seconds away from an overheat rupture," Jenna snapped. "I cleaned the hallway where the compressor line hums. It has been getting hotter for days. You all ignored it." Garrett leaned in. Her voice was calm, precise, her logic unshakable. One of the junior techs stepped forward hesitantly. "If she is right, the virtual override would confirm it." "Run it," Garrett ordered. "Bolt, sir." "Run." "It." The command silenced the room. The engineer nodded, loaded Jenna's diagram into the digital twin simulation, and synced it with real-time telemetry from the plant. All eyes turned to the main screen. The simulation loaded, the airflow data recalibrated, and then it happened. The model showed pressure levels dropping steadily, smoothly, not erratically, as it had been for the past 30 minutes. Jenna's adjustments resolved the energy loop, diverted airflow away from the dangerous curve, and rerouted it using a configuration that had not been considered by the original design. Gasps echoed around the room. The board members watching remotely from the surveillance suite leaned forward. One of them, a woman in a navy suit, slowly set down her glass of water. It was working. Garrett turned back to Jenna. "How did you?" "I love puzzles," she said simply, "and you left the blueprint board in the break room unlocked." A beat. He let out a low chuckle. "Remind me to thank security later." The moment stretched. A voice from the simulation console spoke. "Pressure levels are within safe parameters. All red zones neutralized. We are stable." Applause did not break out. It was not that kind of moment. This was not relief. This was awe. Garrett stepped forward, gently closed the notebook, and looked at Jenna like he was seeing her for the first time. "You just saved a facility worth over $300 million. "I just saved your team from blowing themselves up," she corrected, dryly. Behind her, Harper whispered, "Told you my mom was awesome?" Someone chuckled, a few smiled. The chaos had passed. But the aftershock was only beginning. What happened next would change more than airflow. It would change lives. For one fragile fleeting moment there was relief. The first crisis had been narrowly averted. Pressure gauges on the main console dropped back into the green. A soft beep signaled system normalization, and the room slowly exhaled. Garrett Stone, still catching his breath, gave Rebecca a look that hovered between disbelief and admiration. "You saved us," he whispered. The engineers looked stunned. Some embarrassed, one actually clapped, hesitant, then stopped himself. But just as the tension began to release, a high-pitched whine split the air. It came from the far wall. Secondary diagnostics, long forgotten in the chaos, flashed red. "Secondary coolant stack spike, Section 4, an engineer shouted. On the adjacent screen, warning icons burst across the schematics in a flood of crimson. The backup cooling loop, the one nobody had paid attention to during the first emergency, was failing, and fast. The heat from the first surge had overloaded the secondary system, and now it was feeding back into the plant's core. "Oh no," someone whispered. "It is happening again!" Only worse. Alarms began to scream again. Automatic sprinklers hissed to life overhead, spraying cold mist. The sound of a distant pressure valve releasing roared through the steel walls like a freight train. An engineer lunged for the emergency evacuation switch. Garrett blocked his path. "Wait. Sir, it is too late. We need to evacuate, now." Garrett turned, his eyes locked onto Rebecca, who was already moving. "Mom!" Ellie screamed from the observation hallway above. She had pressed herself to the glass, palms flat, eyes wide with terror. "Mom, draw the circles." Those words seemed to cut through the chaos like a scalpel. Rebecca's eyes snapped to the control panel, then the ceiling, then the floor. And without hesitating, she reached into her cleaning cart and grabbed a stick of chalk. The same chalk she used to label chemical bins and joke messages to Ellie on rainy nights. She dropped to the floor, chalk in one hand, open palm in the other. She started drawing directly on the concrete. Circles, lines, arrows, flow curves, expansion ratios, heat zones, vortex paths. A trail of white and pale blue followed her across the factory floor like a comet tail. She spoke aloud as she moved. "Coolant rebound will trigger a reverse pressure pocket in the northern ducts. That pulls heat back into the center line, which loops through the intake manifold. We need to vent at a 32-degree angle, here?" She slammed the chalk against a point she had circled twice. "Here!" Another engineer gaped. "That is not even in our protocol." "Because your protocol is wrong," she said, not slowing her strokes. "You designed for efficiency, not reality." Another voice now joined her. Garrett's. "Give her the valve override." "But..." Now, the override code was punched in. Rebecca's chalk-smudged fingers pointed to a temporary manual valve, a maintenance backup only used during field tests. No one had touched it in months. "Open it exactly halfway," Not full, not quarter, half. A tech sprinted. The valve groaned. For a moment, nothing. Then, one by one, the alarms shut off. First the beeping, then the flashing. Then, silence. Pure cavernous silence. The backup system stabilized, and the heat dropped. Rebecca stood in the middle of the chalk-drawn schematic on the floor, hands trembling, knees sore. Chalk dust clung to her jeans and fingertips. Ellie burst into tears upstairs, banging the glass with joy. She did it! She did it again! Garrett was the first to move. He stepped into the diagram, walked right to her, and offered his hand. You just saved us all twice. No one questioned her anymore. No one even blinked. Some clapped, others openly cried. An engineer who had mocked her earlier sank to his knees. The board members watching via surveillance stood in shock. Rebecca wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist, looked around, and exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. I really need a cup of coffee, she said, voice hoarse. And somehow that line made the entire room laugh. But in that moment, standing in the middle of a life-saving sketch drawn with sidewalk chalk, Rebecca Lane was no longer invisible. She was the person who had saved a $300 million facility and every life inside it. And she had done it not with status, not with degrees, but with clarity, instinct, and chalk dust. The next morning, the aerospace facility felt different. Not in the blinking monitors or the new safety protocols being installed at record speed, but in the way people looked at Rebecca Lane. She was no longer invisible. Garrett Stone found her near the service entrance, replacing paper towels in a dispenser, as if nothing extraordinary had happened the day before. You are really still working your shift? He asked. Rebecca looked up, expression unreadable. The sink in Bay 3 still leaks. So, yeah. He smiled faintly, then handed her a sealed folder. Inside, a formal job offer. A rail position? Systems consultant, he said. Project-based, with autonomy, flexible hours, full benefits. Competitive salary. Rebecca blinked. Garrett leaned against the wall. You saved hundreds of lives with chalk. You caught a flaw no one else did. And your blueprint? That sketch you made? Engineering wants to incorporate it into the training manual. She hesitated, closing the folder. I cleaned floors in this place, she said. I am not supposed to fix it. You did fix it, he replied, and you are exactly the kind of mind we need more of. Rebecca gave him a long look, then let out a dry laugh. You are serious. She nodded slowly, her ponytail slipping over one shoulder. Well, I still need to walk Ellie to school every morning. Non-negotiable. Of course, Garrett said, smiling. Word spread quickly. By noon, someone had uploaded a security still of her crouched in chalk circles, mid-diagram. It hit social media like wildfire. Within 24 hours, the hashtag #DiagramMom was trending. Comment sections filled with praise. Who is she? Genius in overalls. Smartest woman in the room. And nobody saw her. News outlets picked up the story, interviews were requested, offers rolled in from companies around the country, some even international. But Rebecca, now with job offers from Silicon Valley to Munich, still showed up at the same front gate every morning. Not to clock in as a cleaner, but to walk Ellie into the school building across the street. No matter how many people called her a hero, no matter how viral her face became, she always held her daughter's hand and made sure Ellie got to class with her lunch packed, hair brushed, and laces tied. At the end of the day, that was her favorite role. Still, when Garrett passed her in the hallway later that week, he said, "You know, you have not even opened your company badge yet." Rebecca shrugged. "It feels weird." He smiled. "Get used to it. You are not in the background anymore." And for the first time, Rebecca let herself believe it. She was no longer a ghost in the hallways. She was the woman who saved the factory with chalk. And the world had finally noticed. 3 months later, Rebecca Lane walked into the same aerospace facility, but not in her old faded jeans and utility shirt. Now she wore pressed slacks, a fitted blazer, and a company badge that read Senior Analyst, Safety Systems Innovation Division. Gone were the nights of cleaning supply closets and scrubbing tile floors. Today, she led a team of engineers, yes, actual engineers, who now used her diagrams as foundational references for thermal airflow strategy and fail-safe paneling in high-pressure zones. The chalk she once kept in her cart now lived in a sleek metal case on her office desk, nestled beside printed schematics and colored markers. Her sketches, once scribbled between bathroom breaks, had become official safety blueprints, now standardized across the company's protocols. Rebecca was more than respected, she was sought after. Every Tuesday, she ran hand-stunned STEM workshops in the break room, transforming it into a learning lab for junior engineers and working parents. She used her own journey as a springboard for others. Mothers with hidden talents, young staff with second thoughts about their potential, everyone came. And Ellie became the unofficial mascot of the movement. The curious 8-year-old who once sketched blueprints for fun was now standing in front of groups, explaining simple engineering concepts with construction paper and duct tape. She even guest spoke at a company education day, describing her mom's first chalk drawing as a superhero move. Rebecca had watched from the wings that day, blinking back tears. "You okay?" Garrett had asked, standing beside her. She had smirked. Not crying, just condensation. He had chuckled. Sure. Garrett had become more present, not in title, but in time. He brought coffee to her meetings. He stayed late to walk the floors with her. Their conversations, once clipped and professional, had grown playful and thoughtful. They teased each other, argued about schematic nuances, and debated between jazz and 80s rock during safety test simulations. He had stopped seeing her as a janitor who saved the factory, and started seeing her as Rebecca. And Rebecca? She saw beyond the title. Beyond the power and tailored suits, she saw a man who had risked his reputation to listen to a voice no one else heard. And she liked him. One afternoon, as they walked past the very corridor where it had all started, where the red lights once flashed and the air had once trembled, Garrett reached for her hand. She did not pull away. They walked together, silently, through the now quiet factory. Not as cleaner and CEO, but as equals. And for the first time in a long time, Rebecca Lane felt something deeper than pride. She felt free. Exactly 1 year later, the same factory, once filled with flashing lights and emergency alarms, was now hosting something far more joyful, a local science fair. Rows of tables displayed projects built by children, each one brimming with color, curiosity, and chaos. Baking soda volcanoes erupted beside solar-powered scooters. A cardboard robot waved its tinfoil hand. And at the front of it all stood Ellie Lane. She wore a yellow hard hat 2 sizes too big, and a name tag that read Junior Engineer. Her eyes sparkled as she tapped the microphone and welcomed everyone to the first annual Hands-on Safety and Science Fair. Behind her, Rebecca Lane watched with pride. No mop bucket, no smudged sneakers, only a fitted navy blazer, tailored black slacks, and a quiet confidence that filled the room. She had not just found a new job, she had reclaimed her voice. Garrett stood beside her, his arm gently brushing hers. He wore his usual charcoal suit, though today he had traded the briefcase for a canvas tote full of Ellie's extra glue sticks and diagrams. They looked like a family, because they were one. When the speeches ended and applause faded, Garrett turned to Rebecca and slipped a small velvet box into her palm. "No rings," he said softly. "You hate cliches." She opened it. Inside was a pendant. Silver, simple, beautiful. It was shaped like a spiral airflow curve, the exact pattern she had drawn on the floor with chalk the night she saved the plant. Underneath, a small engraving read, "To the woman who stopped the world from burning down." Rebecca blinked, then laughed. "You got this, mate?" Garrett shrugged, grinning. Custom designed? I figured diamonds are overrated when you already outshine them. She looked up at him, and before she could make another sarcastic remark, he leaned in and kissed her. Not hurried, not dramatic. Just certain. The press cameras clicked. Someone nearby whispered, "That is the woman from the explosion story." But Rebecca barely heard it. She only looked at Ellie, who was grinning like she had won a Nobel Prize. Later, as the event wound down and families began to pack up poster boards and trifold displays, Garrett led them both to a new wing of the facility. A glass wall bore the words, "The Rebecca Lane Innovation Lab." Ellie gasped, "Is that your name, Mommy?" Rebecca stared, her throat tightened. "It is." Garrett touched her back gently. "It is not just for what you did. It is for what you do, every day." She stepped inside. Whiteboards lined the walls, already filled with diagrams and color-coded notations. Kids laughed as they built prototype drones in the corner. But it was quiet, too. Peaceful in the way only a place built on second chances can be. Rebecca knelt beside Ellie. "You know, when you were a baby, I used to draw blueprints during your naps. I thought maybe I was wasting time." Ellie tilted her head. "But they were warm-up drawings, right?" Rebecca laughed, then nodded. "Yeah, they were warm-ups." As the three of them walked out, hand in hand, a trio formed not by accident, but by choice. The sun broke through the clouds above the factory's roof. Rebecca turned once more, looking back. Not in sadness, but in awe. A cleaner had become a consultant. A whisper had become a shout. And love had grown not from perfection, but from trust, resilience, and the courage to speak, even when no one listened. Sometimes, the world only hears the loudest voices. But sometimes, it takes one quiet woman, one defiant shout, and one chalk-drawn diagram to change everything. Rebecca Lane did not have the title, she did not have the degree, but she had something rarer: clarity, courage, and a heart that refused to stay silent. In a world that almost ignored her, she became unforgettable. Because heroes do not always wear suits. Sometimes they wear ponytails and carry backpacks, and love like it is the most powerful force in the world. Did this story move you? We would love to hear your thoughts. Let us know where you are watching from in the comments. We read every single message. And if you believe in stories that touch the heart, stir the soul, and remind us of the strength within everyday people, hit that subscribe button. Because sometimes the smallest voices hold the greatest power, and the next story might just be yours.